Adam Story with ABC News. Heavy rain continues to hit parts of the state following severe thunderstorms across Sydney overnight. Danuta Gazaki reports.
The New South Wales State Emergency Service says Maitland in the Hunter region is the latest area to be hit with heavy rain, with a childcare centre and some local shops sandbagged due to the large amount of water. SES spokesperson Alicia Dooley says there's been over 800 calls for help statewide yesterday and today. She says there's been more than a dozen flood rescues, especially in Sydney's north, Orange in the central west and the Hunter region.
Overall, we got 14 flood rescues, where 10 of those were involving cars.
As the clean-up continues, some households remain without power in Sydney's north, south-east and inner city.
There's heavy traffic in the Blue Mountains tonight, with all westbound lanes of the Great Western Highway still closed following a multi-car crash. It follows the accident involving a truck and 5 cars between Leura and Wentworth Falls earlier today. 7 people were taken to hospital, including a child. One man is in a serious but stable condition with suspected hip and rib injuries. Traffic authorities say only one eastbound lane of the highway has been reopened. Emergency services in New Zealand say they're ready to respond if the weather situation escalates as recovery efforts continue from ex-tropical cyclone Gabrielle. Chelsea Hetherington reports.
More than a week since Cyclone Gabrielle tore through the North Island, another period of heavy rain is expected. Hawke's Bay is in for 48 hours of wet weather from tomorrow, with heavy falls also possible around hard-hit Gisborne. Auckland Emergency Management Controller Rachel Kelleher says more rain is also on the way there too, and the focus remains on supporting recovery efforts.
There's still a lot of work to do, and we're grateful for the patience and resilience being shown by those in the community.
Power is yet to be restored to thousands of homes, and hundreds of kilometres of roads still have to be repaired.
The Prime Minister says confirmation that wages are growing at an annual pace of 3.3% is encouraging. Newly released data from the Bureau of Statistics shows wages rose by 0.8% in December. They grew 0.1% in the last quarter. Real wages continue to fall, though, with inflation outrunning wage growth at 7.8%. But Anthony Albanese says it's a sign wages are beginning to move again.
The fastest rate of wages growth in a decade, confirmed today. Good jobs and fair wages are fundamental to an economy that works for people, not the other way around.
The Robodebt Royal Commission has heard the department responsible for managing the illegal debt collection scheme had a culture that stopped people asking questions about the legality of the program. More from Alexandria Oetting.
Former Chief Counsel at the Department of Human Services, Tim French, has today fronted the inquiry into the illegal automated debt scheme. He worked in a role at DHS between 2019 and 2020. Mr French was asked why he thought lawyers in the department didn't seek legal advice about robo-debt after a top silk gave a presentation at a conference that put the legality of the scheme into question. He said he thought DHS senior executives had a control and command management style, which stopped employees asking questions about the program. He said he would have recommended DHS seek advice about robo-debt had he been in the role in 2017.
China's top diplomat, Wang Yi, is holding another meeting in Moscow, this time with Russian Foreign Minister Sergei Lavrov, amid concerns that Beijing may be ready to provide military support for the war in Ukraine. The BBC's Nicholas Rocher reports.
From the start of Russia's so-called special military operation 1 year ago, China has refused to condemn Moscow's invasion of Ukraine, although it has claimed it is impartial in the conflict. This week, Wang Yi said China supported peace and negotiations and would put forward its own position on a political settlement of the crisis. It's not clear what Mr. Wang will say in Moscow, but the EU and Washington have warned Beijing against providing military assistance to Russia's war effort in Ukraine.
Award-winning musician Sampa the Great has pulled out of the Byron Bay Blues Fest. In a statement, her representative says the Zambian artist has been advocating to be removed from the festival for a week after seeing the lineup. It comes after King Gizzard and the Lizard Wizard cancelled their performance following criticism of the inclusion of the band Sticky Fingers. That band's lead singer, Dylan Frost, was previously involved in an offstage incident with another Australian artist. To the weather for tomorrow, a few showers and the chance of a thunderstorm in the northeast, the chance of a shower elsewhere in the east, early fog patches in the southeast. It'll be dry and mostly sunny in the west. For Sydney, an overnight low of 19, followed by a partly cloudy day with the slight chance of a shower and a top of 25. It'll be partly cloudy with the slight chance of a shower on Thursday and 26. That's ABC News at 6:05.
You're listening to Drive with Richard Glover on ABC Radio Sydney. G'day, Richard Glover with you on ABC Radio Sydney. Coming up, an expert report tendered to the inquiry into the convictions of Kathleen Folbig for killing her 4 children claims the diary entries that were used to convict her are not admissions of guilt. We'll talk to our court reporter, Jamelle Wells, first up in this half hour. With the same pay as for 5 days, gains a big leg up in the UK, tested by over 60 firms with surprising results. You'll hear from the New Zealand business leader who kicked it all off, and Indira Naidu with the evening show. It's all ahead here on ABC Radio Sydney, on radio at 7:02 a.m, on the ABC Listen app, on digital radio, on TV's Channel 25, and of course online everywhere. Yeah, just a final note in that conversation with Anne about parenting and what happens when you've had bad parenting yourself and what that means for your life and your own parenting. This is very interesting, I think. The first from one of our texters, doesn't give a name, but the first thing I had to do to recover from some fairly dysfunctional parenting from my father was to realise he was human and facing his own demons. Forgiving him helped me separate who I am from his behaviour towards me and do things differently with my own kids. My siblings were more focused on how they'd been victimised by him, and I think they've not been able to move on in the same way. So, yeah, we were talking about that right at the end. We were talking about the seeing the damage, the damaged parents, and realising that there was probably a reason for their damage, and that's a kind of important moment in your own growth. Emma in Randwick says, I had a dreadful mother who has narcissistic personality disorder, practised awful passive-aggressive behaviour, signalled me out as the only other female in the family. I spent thousands of dollars and time unpacking the damage she created. My body was so tight, which affected my ability to get pregnant. Once I understood who she was, I no longer let her affect me. I took back control mentally, and my body loosened. I became pregnant with my son in absolutely no time, and I vowed never to act that way to my own son. And to this day, I haven't. That's from Emma. Jamelle Wells, our ABC senior court reporter, is with us again as the Kathleen Folbig inquiry continues. This woman, as you know, has already served about 20 years in prison for killing her 4 children. But now there's lots of evidence in various ways, scientific evidence about the fact that at least 2 or 3 of them had, the 2 girls had a genetic disease which may have caused their death. The son had epilepsy in a way that Monique Ryan, a paediatrician before she became a politician, says may have been the cause of his death. And then a lot of focus today on the diary entries, which were a big part of what convicted her in the first place. I think these diary entries which seem to be confessions of guilt, but maybe not, according to an expert witness today. Jamelle Wells is with us. Good afternoon.
Good afternoon, Richard.
Yeah, the diary was the focus today, wasn't it?
Well, this was a written submission to the inquiry from a witness who is actually going to be called up on Friday. So it was tabled as part of the inquiry and released, so we were able to get a hold of it and report on it for you. But there is a series of psychologists and psychiatrists that are going to start giving evidence in person from tomorrow about Kathleen Folbig's diary entries. And this written submission, Richard, was from Dr. Joanna Garstang. She's an expert in the UK in sudden unexplained infant death, and she has looked through the diaries and she's analysed particular lines in them that seem quite damning and that were used against Kathleen Folbig at her trial. And Dr. Garstang has said that they are expressions of self-blame and guilt, and she says that they are things that she's witnessed in her clinical and research practice, and she does not consider them to be true confessions of guilt.
In other words, a mum having lost her children might be just feeling terrible about herself and the world and how did I let this happen kind of thing.
That's right. And what we heard in the very openings of this inquiry is that a range of experts who've analysed the diaries will give evidence over the next couple of days about how they think Kathleen Folbig has some very serious grief disorder from having experienced a lot of trauma through the deaths of her children. And she's someone who wrote these diary entries when she was having relationship problems and didn't have a lot of social support, and that they were a coping mechanism. And she herself, remember we talked a couple of days ago about letters she wrote from jail referring to her diary entries as sounding atrocious, but saying, I wrote them when I was not in a positive frame of mind. I referred to black moods, which were my depressive state, nothing nasty or murderous or evil. But some of the diary entries are very damning, and the case against her at trial in 2003, the Crown case was that the diary entries were an admission of guilt, and they listed a whole string of them. And the entries included things like she had mixed feelings about her children, how she was feeling very depressed and angry, and how one of her children wouldn't be quiet. And one of the lines she used was about her daughter Sarah, and her daughter Laura, I should say, and she said she was angry and depressed and upset after she, and I quote, lost it with Laura. And she said, I'm scared that she'll leave me now just like Sarah did, and I knew I was short-tempered and cruel sometimes to her, and she left with a bit of help. That was a diary entry in January 1998. And another entry written sometime later was, I often regret Caleb and Patrick only because your life changes so much, and maybe I'm not a person who likes change. So they were the sorts of diary entries that were used to convict her.
It is interesting, though, that those are sort of thoughts that would have, parenting is hard. You can imagine many parents having moments. They might not confide them to a diary, but they might confide them in their own black moods to, am I up to this? Can I cope with all the requirements of parenting? Because some of the diary entries, that's kind of all they're saying, really.
Yes, and that's exactly what the counsel assisting said. She said they were expert witnesses who've analysed them since 2003 will argue that they were a coping mechanism and a way for her to pour her heart out and try to make sense of what happened. And remember, at this inquiry, we've heard some witnesses argue that all the children possibly died from some sort of natural cause. And one witness very early on in the piece said that he thought it was very tragic, that the story of the Folbig children and family was very tragic and very sad. And remember too, there's been reference also to Kathleen Folbig's own background. Remember that when she was very young, only a young child, her father murdered her own mother, and she was actually placed into foster care from a very young age. So it's not as if she's had an easy childhood, and these expert witnesses are expected to include that in some of the evidence that they give.
Yeah, I mean, what a life to have that happen. And then, I mean, let's assume just for a second that she is innocent, to be in prison for over 20 years. To lose your 4 children, then to be in prison for over 20 years.
You just can't imagine it, can you? And of course, the point of this inquiry, even though she was convicted and given that long jail sentence, is questioning those convictions. And this particular inquiry came about because new scientific evidence was discovered that suggested her daughters have some sort of gene mutation that could have caused their deaths. And we've heard over the last couple of days that her 2 sons had medical issues as well. So she has maintained all along she's innocent, and she's never given up, nor have a large group of her supporters who include very senior members and well-respected people in the scientific community. So it'll be interesting to see what comes out of this inquiry.
Yeah, what the inquiry concludes in the end after hearing all this evidence. Jamelle, thank you so much.
You're welcome, Richard.
Jamelle Wells, our ABC senior court reporter. It is currently 14 minutes past 6 here on ABC Radio. traffic first.
ABC Radio Sydney traffic.
At Mount Tomah, Bellsliner Road near Skyline Road, 2 trucks and a car have had an accident there. There are people trapped, I'm afraid. Heavy traffic conditions and the road is closed in both directions. So the Bellsliner Road near Skyline Road at Mount Tomah closed in both directions. It's been a bad day for the mountains. The other big problem has been Wentworth Falls, the Great Western Highway between Lura Mall and Scott Avenue. Multiple vehicles involved in an accident there. And the highway is still closed westbound. One eastbound lane they've managed to get reopened, but still a big problem at Wentworth Falls. If you're in Woolloomooloo, the Eastern Distributor off-ramp to Cathedral Street, a truck breakdown there with one of 2 southbound lanes affected. And at Paddington, Oxford Street, just past Young Street, a car breakdown with 1 eastbound lane gone. That's the latest. Well, across Britain, 61 companies and organisations moved their staff into a 4-day week pattern with no drop in salary. It was a test, a 6-month period starting in June last year. And the results have now been published. And they show that 56 of the 61 companies, so the vast majority, have decided to stick with the 4-day week arrangement after the end of the trial due to the benefits they saw. In fact, 18 firms already have declared the move permanent. Employees in the trial reported lower levels of stress and burnout, took fewer sick days, while employers saw improvements in both revenue and staff retention with no loss of productivity. This according to the largest ever trial examining the effects of moving to a 4-day working week. So could it be that most elusive of things? An idea which is good for profits and for employees, which makes the boss happy, but also the worker happy. Andrew Barnes is the co-founder of the 4-Day Week Global and director of Perpetual Guardian in New Zealand. We talked to him on Drive before about how he came up with this idea and worked it with his own company in New Zealand. But now it's really getting to be a big worldwide movement. And he joins us again on Drive. Andrew, good afternoon.
Good afternoon, Richard.
Now, you're over in the UK where this has been big news today. Can you tell us about the study or at least the test period, how it came about and the results that are now in?
Yeah, well, this is one of the second of our large trials. We did US, Canada and Ireland, which reported just before Christmas. The UK is reporting now. And then in a couple of months, we will have the results from our Australia and New Zealand trials. And what we do is we get a whole pile of companies together. We give them some support and mentoring, access to people who've done it before. And then they run the program, the pilot program, in their own organizations for 6 months. And then we run research alongside, which is coordinated in this case by Boston College and Cambridge University.
To ask the simplest question, how can productivity not be affected when people are working fewer hours?
Well, I think the start point, Richard, is that actually we're not actually productive the whole time we're at work. And so what this is doing is saying, how do you change the behaviors, the processes, the attitudes often of people at work so that you eliminate all that unproductive time? How many of us have spent far too long, for example, in meaningless meetings?
So if you're working 4 days a week, it focuses the mind basically of everybody.
That's exactly right. The early studies that made me go down this path indicated that people were only productive for 2.5 to 3 hours a day. And so all you actually have to do if you drop a day is find 45 minutes of additional productivity. What, of course, happens is people, when given the opportunity to work smarter, and they get the benefit in the time off that's important to them, what actually happens is productivity goes up. One of the results from the trial was that revenues of participating companies in the trial were 35% higher than the comparable period the year before.
Wow,
that's
a
even
big,
allowing for COVID.
Yeah,
that is an incredible statistic.
Well, up by a third. Some of the figures: a 65% reduction in sick days, a 57% drop in the number of staff leaving compared with the same 6-month period in the previous year. And this all goes to the fact that so many companies are then putting up their hands to stick with it. I wonder though, know whether some of this impact is short-term, whether people are so grateful for this new program that they work their socks off for 6 months, but then if it was absolutely standardised over the whole economy and this wasn't some special treat provided by this one company for a short period, I wonder if it would run out of steam.
There is a risk of that. Obviously, we've been doing it in Perpetual Guardian now for 4 years. We haven't seen that. You've got companies like Volkswagen that manufacture cars on a 4-day week. They're not seeing it. And countries like Holland, which have a average working week, I think at about 28 hours, they are high productive countries. So what I think we will need to do now is continue to report on these companies as they continue their journey and see if, in fact, productivity, does drop. But we don't think it will, having seen the evidence from those organisations like ourselves that have been doing it for years.
Andrew Barnes is with us. The other thing which is so fascinating, maybe this is the most important thing of all, actually, we've been talking about profits and sick days and all of that. People are spending more time with their kids.
They are. And interestingly, one of the statistics that really jumped out of this report was that in the trial, the amount of time men spent looking after their children went up 27%. Now, that's got real implications when we talk about gender equality. Not only does the 4-day week assist in getting rid of those 4 days 80% pay contracts that a lot of returning mothers do. But when we allow our men to get out of the organisation, where the badge of honour isn't about working long hours, you start to see this cascade in terms of better outcomes at home, better outcomes for our kids. And I think that's one of the most interesting statistics in the report.
Well, and also you make a better employee, don't you? I always think if I don't know what you're running, if you're running an advertising agency or a supermarket, or you want actually a worker who spends some time at the soccer coaching. You want them talking to parents about their experience in the supermarket or whatever business you're in. That makes a person who understands their society better.
You want people to be the best they can be at work and the best they can be at home. That's absolutely a mantra. And so you're right. I think this gives you much better connection. We were talking to one of the participants, Atom Bank here, and what they said is that when they announced it, the volume of people who came and joined their organisation, in terms of clients, they were absolutely overwhelmed. And the reasoning being is I think it also makes the organisation more human, and people relate to organisations that are more human and that are seen to be progressive and treat their employees well.
Andrew Barnes is with us, co-founder of 4-Day Week Global and director at Perpetual Guardian in New Zealand. He's a business leader himself, brought this into his own company and now is watching this worldwide research. As you heard, Canada and US reporting before Christmas. Now the big report from the UK with a report of the participating Australian and New Zealand firms to come. Just a question without notice on the text line. Can you ask Andrew whether it matters what day of the week they have off? Do they all have to have the same day off?
No, look, we are an organisation, for example, that needs to have retail branches open all the time. So we have some people who take a Monday, some a Tuesday. We have people who take a couple of afternoons. And we have working parents who often work 5 days but compressed hours. So when we say 4-day week, what we're talking about is what we call the 100-80-100 principle. 100% pay, 80% of time, but provided we get 100% productivity. And so what happens is different companies decide how they're going to deal with that. Some do close for a day. We're one of the ones that don't. And if you look at an organisation like Volkswagen, they manufacture cars 24/7, but yet their employees are working 32 hours.
Okay, so that's interesting, something like a factory. I can understand why knowledge workers in an office might be able to just lift their productivity in the way that you suggest. With something like a factory model, isn't everyone almost forced to get to the rhythm of the machine anyway?
Yeah, but they don't have to work 9 to 5 to get to the rhythm of the machine. They can actually work different shift patterns, and that's what Volkswagen proves. Actually also equally applies in medical facilities. So, for example, Stanford Medical School has gone on to a 4-day week. And now we've got some of the health trusts in the UK starting to talk about maybe shifting to a 4-day week. And that means, of course, you have less burnout in your nurses and your doctors. That then in turn leads to better health outcomes because you're not making those mistakes when you're stressed. And that in turn probably means that you don't keep losing people to the industry. So we believe it is applicable whether you're in manufacturing, retailing, logistics, health, or conventional knowledge-based businesses.
It's such an interesting study, and the results are so startling in terms of profitability and employee engagement from the UK study. Just tell me quickly, Andrew, the Australian study. How many companies have you got involved here in New Zealand in the test study, and are you getting any signs that they're going to get as good results as this?
We haven't yet got the data out. It's coming out in a couple of months. We've got about 33 companies, of which the vast majority are Australian, are participating in that pilot. It's going to be interesting because that's the one we'll say, well, then it's about the 5th and 6th countries that we've run these trials. The outcomes are consistent. And then the one after that is South Africa, which is going to be very interesting because obviously that is a different culture. And it will be interesting to see whether the African results follow the pattern that healthier, happier, more rested, more engaged staff are more productive.
Well, someone says on the text, this guy is a hero, and I think you're certainly involved in something so interesting. And if these results continue to come through, it might bring an awful lot of happiness to an awful lot of people. Andrew Barnes, thank you very much for talking to me.
Thanks, Richard.
There's Andrew Barnes, Director at Perpetual Guardian in New Zealand and co-founder of the 4-Day Week.
ABC Radio Sydney Traffic.
Jeff Wallace is here from the Australian Traffic Network. Good afternoon.
Good afternoon, Richard. Just picking up on camera here at the TMC. A broken down car. It's on the freeway North Sydney, middle section, northbound, just past the Mount Street overpass. A tow truck is with it. Mount Tomar coming through a crash, and that's blocking both ways for the Belzina Road. We had this earlier crash in the mountains. Still blocking westbound for the Great Western Highway near Lura Mall at Wentworth Falls. Also, Epping Road, very slow for that run westbound Marsfield via Mirror Road up towards Beecroft Road. I'm Jeff Wallace, the Australian Traffic Network.
Jeff, thank you very much. And Indira Naidu on the evening show. How would you like a 4-day? We already have a 4-day week.
Well, I do, but I also work Friday.
You got the TV
show.
You got the TV show too now.
I do, but I think it's a great idea. It makes sense.
I just like somebody testing it out in their own company in New Zealand. Quite a few years ago now, finding it works, and then thinking, this is interesting. And then he's got a very scientific mind, as you heard. He wants it to be properly studied and properly researched to see if it works and see where it works and whether it works in construction and hospitality and in medical. I think it's fascinating.
It's the way to go.
So fascinating.
Our quiz question tonight, Richard, is what is your party trick? Mm-hmm. Do you have one?
Yep, I do.
Oh.
It depends on having friends who like champagne or sparkling wine.
Yeah.
And because I was a Hilton waiter when I was at university, I can open a bottle properly.
Oh.
Which is, you know how people do that noisy thing where they boom, and it hits the ceiling? That's not the right. No,
it's not meant to make a noise, is it?
It's not meant to make. It's meant to, a princess. Imagine a princess, very beautiful princess. Imagine that princess let loose the most tiny and discreet of farts.
Right.
That's what it's meant to sound like.
A princess fart.
Very small. Very delicate, and you hold the cork hot, and then you twist the bottle actually.
Yes, at the bottom.
It goes.
And do you mesmerise all around you?
Oh, people
with your princess fart.
They're pretty impressed. Yeah,
that's a good trick. I want to see you do that one.
Get me a bottle of champagne. That's the first step.
Oh, okay, that's an expensive.
Doesn't
trick.
have to be French. It still works with the cheap stuff.
Well, my trick. It's very hard to translate on radio, but what I can do, which is really weird, is sort of move my head like.
Oh, wow!
Isn't that weird?
Good.
I know.
That's good. We should get a double act.
Me and my weird shaking
head. You can do the
head.
head, I'll do the champagne, and then we'll serve the champers.
All the listeners are thinking, what is she doing to her head?
It's good.
Yeah.
You wait to see it.
So I want to...
all on the evening show with Indira Naidu. It's PM time. That's 6:30.